The galaxy had always looked down upon humanity. For 300 years since first contact, the humans had been treated as children among the stars. The Empire, rulers of 17 star systems, considered them amusing pets. The crystalline collective saw them as primitive creatures barely worth notice. The great powers of the Galactic Council spoke of humanity the way adults speak of toddlers learning to walk. Earth's representatives sat at the far end of the council chamber, given the smallest seats and the least speaking time. Their technology was considered basic. Their ships were seen as slow and clumsy. Their weapons were thought to be laughable toys compared to the plasma cannons of the reality-bending devices of the collective. Humanity had accepted this position with quiet patience, smiling politely at every insult and nodding at every dismissal. Ambassador had represented Earth for 20 years. She had learned to keep her face calm when the High Commander called humans clever monkeys. She had trained herself not to react when the collective speaker referred to Earth as that in the outer spiral. But she had also learned something else in those 20 years. She had learned that every species in the galaxy was afraid of something, and that something was coming. The Devourers arrived without warning. They came from beyond the galactic rim, from the dark spaces between galaxies where no light had ever reached. Their ships were massive, black, and hungry. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply consumed. World after world fell before them. This mighty fleet was scattered like dust in a storm. The crystalline collective's advanced technology proved useless against creatures that existed partially outside normal space. In 6 months, the Devourers had destroyed 40% of known civilization. Entire species had been wiped from existence. The great powers that had once mocked humanity now screamed for help from anyone who would listen. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council became daily events filled with panic and despair. Plans were made and abandoned. Alliances formed and crumbled. Nothing worked. Ambassador watched it all with the same patient expression she had worn for 2 decades. When the High Commander, the same one who had called her people monkeys, came to Earth begging for assistance, she simply smiled and said that humanity would consider what it could do. When the collective speaker offered to share all their technology in exchange for protection, she thanked them politely and said she would pass along the request. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in chambers that had been sealed for longer than any civilization in the galaxy had existed, something ancient was waking up. The tunnels stretched for thousands of kilometers, carved into the planet's crust by hands that were human, but belonged to an age forgotten by history. Within those tunnels rested weapons that had been old when the first stars of the current universe were still young. General stood at the entrance to the primary vault, his heart beating faster than it had during any battle. He had been military for 30 years, and he had known about the relics for exactly 3 of those years. Even among Earth's highest leadership, knowledge of what lay beneath the surface was restricted to fewer than 50 people. The secret had been passed down through generations, protected by families who remembered when humanity had been something different. The vault door was not made of any metal known to modern science. It appeared to shift and change as one looked at it, sometimes seeming solid and sometimes appearing almost transparent. When General placed his hand on the surface, the door recognized something in his genetic code, something that had been carried by his ancestors for over 100,000 years. The door opened. Inside, the relics waited. They did not look like weapons in any traditional sense. There were spheres of perfect darkness that seemed to absorb all light that touched them. There were rods of crystallized time that showed different moments of history depending on the angle of viewing. There were cubes that contained entire pocket universes, each one a potential source of unlimited energy. And in the center of the vault stood the oldest and most powerful artifact of all, a crown made of woven starlight that had been worn by the first human to walk between dimensions. The truth that humanity had hidden from the galaxy was simple but staggering. Humans had not evolved on Earth. They had arrived there, refugees from a war fought across multiple realities, a war that had ended before the current universe had fully formed. The ancestors of modern humanity had been warriors of unimaginable power, beings who had shaped galaxies and played with the fundamental forces of creation. They had grown tired of war and had chosen to forget, to seal away their weapons and their memories and their terrible knowledge, to become simple creatures on a simple world and start again. But they had also known that the darkness they had fled might one day find them again. So they had left the relics, hidden and waiting, protected by genetic locks that would only open for their descendants. They had trusted that future generations would know when the time had come to remember what they truly were. Ambassador stood before the Galactic Council for what she knew would be the last time in the current form of galactic politics. The chamber was filled with terrified representatives from 100 dying civilizations. The Devourers had reached the inner systems now. In days, perhaps hours, they would arrive at the councils itself. She spoke calmly, her voice carrying across the great chamber without amplification. She told them that humanity had something to share. She told them that Earth had been keeping secrets. She told them that the clever monkeys from the outer spiral were about to demonstrate why they had smiled so patiently at every insult for 300 years. Above the council world, the sky changed. Human ships appeared, but they were not the slow and clumsy vessels the galaxy had come to know. These ships moved in ways that violated known physics. They flickered in and out of normal space, appearing in multiple locations simultaneously. Their hulls were covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly, letters from an alphabet that had been ancient when the universe was young. General commanded the fleet from a ship that existed partially outside of time. His crew had spent 3 months learning to use technology that their ancestors had mastered over 100,000 years ago. The learning had been difficult and sometimes painful, but something in their blood remembered. Something deep in human DNA recognized the relics and knew how to make them sing. The Devourers came in their billions, a wave of hunger and darkness that had never known defeat. They had consumed civilizations that had lasted for millions of years. They had eaten gods and drunk the light of dying stars. They feared nothing because nothing had ever given them reason to fear. When the human fleet engaged them, the Devourers learned what fear felt like. The spheres of perfect darkness became weapons that erased matter from existence, leaving not even atoms behind. The rods of crystallized time trapped Devourer ships in loops of moments, freezing them forever between heartbeats. The cubes of pocket universes opened doors to places where the laws of physics were weapons themselves, where fire burned through vacuum and gravity could be pointed like a sword. And General himself wore the crown of woven starlight. He became something more than human, a being of pure will and ancient purpose. He looked at the Devourers and he remembered them. His ancestors had fought their kind before, in the war at the beginning of everything. He knew their weaknesses because his blood remembered how to exploit them. The battle lasted for 17 hours. By the end, the Devourer fleet had been reduced to scattered remnants fleeing back toward the darkness between galaxies. They would not return. They would remember what they had found in the spiral arm they had thought so weak and primitive. They would remember the taste of defeat and the pain of mortality. Ambassador addressed the Galactic Council one final time. The chamber was silent, the representatives too shocked to speak. Everything they had believed about humanity had been proven wrong. The clever monkeys were actually sleeping giants. The primitive technology had been a mask hiding power beyond imagination. She explained that humanity had chosen to forget its past for good reasons. War had made them weary, and power had made them sad. They had wanted to be simple creatures enjoying simple lives. They had wanted to earn their place in the galaxy through hard work and patience, not through fear and domination. But the relics would not be sealed away again. The universe had proven too dangerous for humanity to remain asleep. Earth would take its true place among the stars now, not as conquerors but as guardians. The weapons that had saved the galaxy would be used to protect it, to ensure that no devourer or any other darkness would ever threaten civilization again. The High Commander approached Ambassador after the session ended. His 4 eyes were wide with something she had never seen in them before: genuine respect. He asked her why humanity had endured 3 centuries of mockery when they could have demanded respect at any moment. He asked why they had smiled at insults when they had the power to destroy anyone who offended them. Ambassador smiled the same patient smile she had worn for 20 years. She told him that power without wisdom was just destruction. She told him that her ancestors had learned this lesson the hard way, across wars that had shattered realities and ended universes. True strength was not about crushing those who mocked you. It was about waiting until your strength was truly needed, and then using it to save even those who had been cruel. The High Commander bowed to her, a gesture of submission that no had ever shown to any non in recorded history. He said that perhaps humanity had more to teach the galaxy than how to fight. Perhaps they could teach the old empires how to be patient, how to be humble, how to find strength in kindness rather than cruelty. Earth entered its new age not as a conqueror but as a guardian, not as a destroyer but as a teacher. The relics remained ready, always watching, always protecting. And humanity smiled their patient smiles, knowing that they had finally become what their ancestors had always hoped they would be: not warriors but gardeners, cultivating a galaxy that would grow toward light instead of darkness. The stars themselves seemed brighter after that day. The empty spaces between them seemed less frightening. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the galactic rim, the Devourers told stories to their young about a species that should never be challenged, a species that had been old when time itself was young, a species called humanity that guarded the light against all who would consume it. And on Earth, in the sealed vaults beneath the surface, the relics waited peacefully, humming with ancient power, ready but hopping they would never need to wake again.